Back in 2010, I came across a game that blended real-time strategy, the Middle Ages, and epic battles involving hundreds of soldiers. Medieval 2 Total War. It's a real gem that I hadn't known about until then, and it really made me go wow almost immediately. Released by the Creative Assembly in November of 2006 for Microsoft Windows as a sequel to Medieval Total War, Medieval 2 Total War is the fourth title in the Total War series, following Rome Total War. I quickly got drawn into the game and eventually the whole Total War series. The game was re-released as Total War Medieval 2 in the Definitive Edition. I guess they're trying to make the names a bit more uniform now. This is one entry to the series that I would recommend to anyone, whether you've been into Total War or are absolutely fresh to the series. Medieval 2 is set during the European High and Late Middle Ages, with the Grand Campaign taking place between 1080 and 1530. This game does a really good job at simulating this period of great turmoil, strife, and war. Things like the invention of gunpowder and the Mongol invasion of Europe are simulated as well, and occur as scripted events based on the time period when they did in real life. The number of factions starts off with only 5, England, France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and Venice, but as you beat factions you unlock them for the next campaign. Finishing a full campaign unlocks all 17 of the playable factions. The variations between factions is alright, mostly consisting of various unit strengths and weaknesses, such as the English having a poor variety of cavalry, but having the famed longbowmen and excellent infantry. This game plays very similar to Rome Total War, and many people consider it more of an upgrade to Rome's systems than an outright innovation in of itself. A key difference between Medieval and its predecessors is the division of settlements into either castles or cities. Medieval 1 and Shogun only had castles, and Rome only had towns. Castles focus on buildings that produce better equipped and specialized units, while cities help boost your economy greatly, but can only field simpler units. They can be converted back and forth, which is best done early on in the settlement's development, since doing so destroys any settlement-specific buildings. There's no room in a castle's walls for a cathedral, and it will get knocked down in the conversion process. This division of settlements slightly adds to the medieval atmosphere, having to strike the right balance between the number of castles and cities in order to maximize profits and defense of your realm. Medieval 2 does a good job at refining the management system of these settlements. In Rome you had to control rampant squalor, which led to constant rebellions you had to put down. Not that Rome is a bad game in this respect, but it was nice that they toned down this mechanic so players could focus more on expansion. Your settlements can be managed by members of your royal family or one of your generals, which can net some bonuses to your income, but not so much if they have deep pockets. Like Rome Total War, your generals and family members can gain traits or followers which affect their stats. There's a bunch of stats bars, piety, loyalty, chivalry, that sort of thing, that lower or increase depending on... well, honestly, it's a hidden numbers game. Your family member or general can become more chivalrous through obvious actions like releasing prisoners or not running down a fleeing enemy, but then they'll pick up random shitty followers like those goddamn pagan magicians that lower piety. I know that there's a whole scheme that the game is following to determine all of these things, but the conditions are so vague and not stated clearly in-game that it just feels random sometimes. It's pretty annoying to have a bunch of generals that are unpious alcoholics who suck at governing, and not really knowing where, how, or why exactly they picked up these habits or followers. Just keep everyone camped outside of your town, where there's no money, inns, or brothels to corrupt your leaders. Religion is another gameplay element and an aspect of medieval life that was included, split up between Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Islam. As annoying as it may be to some, especially if you play as a Catholic kingdom, I really feel this is a great mechanic that also helps simulate medieval culture. I actually like that you have to kiss up to the Pope, or how he'll tell Catholic nations to stop fighting one another, or how he can excommunicate your faction, pissing absolutely everyone off in your lands. It just feels authentic for a game set in a time where religion and God is everything to everyone. Be sure to pump out as many priests or imams as you can because there's heretics, witches, and even just foreign religious agents that passively try to convert your population and cause unrest. It can become a serious problem, and if most of your settlement's population isn't following your religion specifically, rioting can break out. Again, very authentic. Diplomacy in Medieval 2 is an important aspect of the game as well. Even though it's a bit clunky, you'll have to grapple with various diplomatic actions with other nations. Mainly just trade rights, which you should always agree to, Maybe it's because it's an older game, but it seems like the alliances mean nothing since the AI is constantly breaking them in order to attack you. Especially Milan, which has become a bit of a meme among Medieval 2 players. Don't trust Milan. Ever. The real-time battles feel really good, especially compared to Rome, where I felt the units moved a bit cartoonishly too fast. I think I've read some people complain that the units react too slowly to commands, which I get a bit frustrated about too, but whether or not it's a technical limitation or on purpose, I like it because it feels more realistic that a block of 60 or 120 men would take time to react to a command. The units do have some trouble with pathfinding when trying to storm crowded castle walls. Mounted units are the kings of the battlefield in this game, and unless you're mostly fighting formations of spears, cavalry is key to a lot of these battles as they can quickly maneuver around enemy formations and charge them from behind with lances, which is usually an instant rout. They also help in killing routing units, which I find foot soldiers have a harder time keeping up with in this game compared to Rome, where a rout could quickly turn into a massacre. Overall, the combat is great. It's just epic to see your troops slug it out and try to outflank the enemy's formations, and once cannons and firearms are introduced, it really shakes up the battles and sieges. For players of later entries in the series, you'll be disappointed to know that the sea battles are purely auto-resolved, so there won't be any epic medieval galley-on-galley action. Unfortunate, but considering all of the practice they've had in later entries to the series, I'm sure if they ever make a Medieval 3, it probably would have sea battles. The graphics are still really good and very robust considering how old the game is. I have to admit the animations are starting to look a little clunky after over a decade, but it still looks pretty damn sharp for its age, and it's still better than Rome's clunky and stiff animations. A very welcome change from previous Total War titles was the variation in the armor and faces of units. Instead of looking like an army of perfect clones, a unit's clothes and faces are now varied, and it gives a strong impression that everyone brought their own armor from home. As you improve a unit's armor on the map screen, so too is the appearance updated in battle. It's very pleasing to stare at all of the pretty armor varieties, and it's almost a shame that most of them are gonna get destroyed in battle. The soundtrack is absolutely great. It was composed by Jeff Van Dyke. I mispronounced that back in my video where I talked about Emperor Rise of the Middle Kingdom. Anyway, the music really digs in that feeling of war and despair that must have been felt during medieval times. The strategic map has haunting and unnerving harp tracks that make you feel like a king carefully planning his next move, always only one blunder away from death. The actual battle music is absolutely epic. It feels like I'm watching a movie most of the time. Just listen to that score. These guys are ready to cut your head off in the name of God, King, and Country, and the music does a really great job at letting you know this. The game came out with an expansion, Kingdoms, which introduced 4 new campaigns, the Americas campaign, which is set in the New World in 1512, and lets you play as Spain or any of the major native factions, the Britannia campaign, which greatly expands and focuses on the British Isles in 1258, and the drama between England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Norway, and the Barons Alliance. The Crusades campaign is set in 1174, just before the Third Crusade, and lets you experience the tense fighting over the Holy Land between the Christian and Islamic realms. Finally, the Teutonic campaign puts you in the midst of the Northern Crusades in 1250, focusing on the conflict between Christianity and Baltic paganism. Crush paganism as the mighty Teutonic Order, or try to hold on to those pagan traditions as the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Each campaign tosses in its own bits of flavor to spice it up, and they're all very solid, but none really reach the girth of the main game's grand campaign. The game also allows for players to add their own mods to the game. There's a ton of mods that you can add. There's mods for updating textures, updating names, updating voices, updating the AI, updating unit appearances, even total conversion mods that overhaul the gameplay and story. The most popular of these mods is the Stainless Steel mod that adds new systems, rebalances the game, changes the interface, and other bits and pieces. Personally, I've only ever played the game in its vanilla state, so I can't say much more on the mods, but if that's your cup of tea, it is an option. Medieval 2 is a timeless classic, so much so that it's actually getting ported to Android and iOS. Or it was ported to Android and iOS, depending on when you see this video. This has been a wish of mine for a long time now, ever since I saw they ported Rome Total War and its expansions to phones and tablets. I had always wanted it to happen to Medieval 2, and here it is! This is honestly my favorite Total War in the series, even with all its flaws and rough edges. I really recommend you try it out if you ever get the chance, especially if you're into the Middle Ages. Despite being 16 years old at the time of this video's making, I think it's an amazing simulation of medieval warfare and strategy. Sure, it's not Crusader Kings level of complex where every intricate interaction between nobles and dynasties is simulated, but that doesn't mean the game is any less grand. And it's very possible for a playthrough to last multiple days or even weeks. Even if you've only played the newer games in the Total War series, you'll be pleasantly surprised to find Medieval 2's empire building to be quite satisfying. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, please drop a like and be sure to check out my other videos.